Dr. Isabella Wentz is an internationally acclaimed thyroid specialist and a licensed pharmacist who has dedicated her career to addressing the root cause of autoimmune thyroid disease after being diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis in 2009. She's the author of 3 books on Hashimoto's and is a New York Times bestseller. Her new book, Adrenal Transformation Protocol, is available now. In today's episode, you're going to learn about the thyroid gland, the adrenal glands, how they play together in the body to balance our hormones and make us feel great. You're also going to get some tips on supplements to take and blood markers to ask your doctor to call for if you even think this in the slightest that you have any type of thyroid disease, specifically looking out for Hashimoto's. All right, let's welcome Isabella to the show. All right, Dr. Wentz, I'm so excited to have you on the show today. We were talking before it started. There are so many times I'm sitting down with patients and clients shared with a functional MD, and they report to me that they have been on thyroid medication for years and years, only to find out that they have Hashimoto's 5, 8, 10 years after the fact. And they're really disheartened and they're shocked. And all of your work for, the past decade has really been in this space and in this place. And you've been known as the thyroid pharmacist and written multiple books and just really shared so much critical information in this space. So thank you for all of your work and for really shedding light on this very, very important topic.
And thank you so much for your kind words. And I'm a huge fan of your work and all of the awareness that you're spreading and everything that you share about living a healthy lifestyle. And it is crazy that so many women have Hashimoto's, but they're just told that their thyroid is sluggish, that their thyroid is not producing enough hormone. And these are the women that are lucky, right? So some women actually get misdiagnosed for 10 years where they're told they have an anxiety disorder. Doctors can't figure out why they're having multiple miscarriages. I've seen women misdiagnosed with like bipolar disorder, all kinds of things, or told that they're hypochondriacs when they have Hashimoto's, and this is an autoimmune attack on the thyroid gland. And it's just so common and so underdiagnosed that I just really appreciate you having me on here to talk about the awareness that we need to get out there.
Definitely. Well, your previous book was all about the root cause of thyroid disease, which is Hashimoto's, and your new book is the Adrenal Transformation Protocol, and that comes out in April. So we'll touch on both, but I'd love for you to tell me a little bit about your history and your past and what got you interested in thyroid health and how you started helping people identify this hidden cause.
So in full disclosure, I was never interested in the thyroid gland during pharmacy school. I was like, oh my gosh, thyroid conditions are so boring. You just need to give people meds and one type of medication. And, I want to learn about more interesting conditions. And then, of course, I was diagnosed with a thyroid condition myself in my 20s after almost a decade of some really kind of strange symptoms where I got the runaround from my doctors. Like, you have allergies, well, take some Claritin, right? You have acid reflux, take some PPIs. You have carpal tunnel, take some pain meds. You're anxious, maybe you need some anti-anxiety medications or antidepressant medications. And I was like, my hair is falling out. I'm cold in every room that I walk into. I'm losing my memory. I have brain fog. And I just kind of heard the messages that, well, you're just getting older, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know you and I had a laugh about this. I just turned 40, over the summer. So this was when I was 25. I was hearing that I was getting older, right? And just so many people. I could laugh about it now, but at the time I was like, maybe I am getting older. Nobody can figure out what's wrong with me. And finally, I got the diagnosis of Hashimoto's. I had really high thyroid antibodies, and my TSH was elevated, which indicated that I was no longer able to produce my own thyroid hormones. And at that point is when most people are diagnosed and they're given a thyroid hormone medication, kind of sent away and saying like, this is it. And nothing else that you're going through is related. So I got the medications. I was excited to get the medications being a pharmacist, but at the same time, they didn't do I still had most of my symptoms. I was a little bit less cold and I needed a little bit less sleep. I went from like 12 hours to 11 hours of sleep, but I still had the carpal tunnel. I still had anxiety. I still had IBS. I still had acid reflux. I still had like the fatigue. And I was like, is there anything else that I can do to make myself feel better, for one? And two, is there anything that I could do to perhaps get my condition into remission? I have these raging antibodies and this autoimmune response against my thyroid gland. Could I calm that down? And so that's what set me off on being the thyroid pharmacist, was really becoming an expert in Hashimoto's / a human guinea pig to really get myself well. And I also had a younger cousin that had been diagnosed. So I was like, if I can maybe get this information out to her, maybe she'll feel better, right? And at a younger age than I did, because I went through some weird stuff when I was undiagnosed, when I thought there was something, wrong with my mental health and so on and so forth.
So, what do you think the main reason is that women go misdiagnosed or undiagnosed with Hashimoto's?
I feel like it's super frustrating just in general for women to get the kind of care they need from doctors. And there's a lot of statistics on this that women tend to, be labeled as hypochondriacs more often, and they're not taken as seriously when they go to the doctor, right? So men might be presenting with the same symptoms, they might get more of a comprehensive workup than a woman would. And the other tricky part is that a lot of the thyroid symptoms can be so nonspecific, just because thyroid hormone impacts like every cell in the body. So, I mean, you could be tired because you have a thyroid condition, but something else could be the cause. Or you could just be like not sleeping well, right? You could have sleep apnea and all of these different causes. And so the symptoms are nonspecific. And then the other part of it is that doctors don't run the right tests. So I kept getting tested for a thyroid condition every time I went to the doctor and said I was tired, but they tested my TSH, which is one of these wonderful hormones to test when you have like really advanced cases of hypothyroidism. But in like the first 10 years of Hashimoto's, that TSH number is potentially going to be quote unquote within the normal limits. And you need to test for thyroid antibodies, and those can be elevated for 5, 10, 15 years before you have a change in TSH. And the antibodies are, what's causing the inflammation in your body. And that's or a marker of inflammation in your body. And the thing is, it's kind of backwards, because if you have an elevation in TSH, some doctors will then test you for antibodies, where I feel like the antibodies should be tested first, because if you can catch them, we can work on reducing the inflammation, the antibodies, and so on and so forth. And we could prevent the damage to the thyroid gland and prevent a whole host of symptoms and lots of doctor visits that can be super frustrating when we don't get the right answers.
I think you make a really important point. It is so often that a doctor is waiting for a problem with TSH before they're calling for antibodies. So if you're giving advice to young women out there that feel like something might be off, like you said, the symptoms are very nonspecific. They can be everything from like feeling really tired to brain fog to anxiety, which, in today's day and age, everyone's like, that's all normal. um, what what markers would you have people call for to identify if they have Hashimoto's?
The TPO antibodies and TG antibodies, so they're thyroid peroxidase and thyroglobulin antibodies. But if you just write TPO and TG and then give that on a piece of paper to your doctor, they should know what that is. Okay. And like I said, those are really sensitive markers. And then, of course, I would look at the TSH test and then the free T3 and the free T4. Those are more markers of like, are you a candidate for thyroid hormone replacement? Because at a certain point, when we have Hashimoto's long enough, that can be the fastest thing and the most effective thing to stabilize us, right? I know I love talking about functional medicine and root cause medicine, but sometimes medications can be a big game changer as well.
Right. When you're dealing with a host of symptoms and you just can't like get that healing going, it can definitely jumpstart you to feeling so much better so quickly. So when it comes to Hashimoto's, this, kind of the root cause, can we talk about the root cause and why it's becoming sort of like a really prominent thyroid disease, what's happening and what's physically and structurally happening in the body to the thyroid gland?
Sure. In Hashimoto's, the what's essentially happening is that we have an autoimmune condition where the immune system starts to recognize the thyroid gland as a foreign invader. And then an autoimmune attack is launched against the thyroid gland. And so the thyroid gland will be destroyed by our own immune system. There's a couple of theories of why that happens. One of them is because we might have an infection within the thyroid gland. And so our immune system is like, let me attack the infection and it's home where it lives, right? And so that could be one potential trigger or root cause. It could be because we have an infection somewhere within our bodies where it's known as molecular mimicry, where there's a sequence on that infectious organism that looks like our thyroid gland. And so the immune system kind of tags that sequence and then as something to attack. And then both the thyroid and the infection get attacked. And then there's a whole host of other things, such as toxins that can damage the thyroid gland, nutrient deficiencies that can prevent it from working properly. And all of these different things like sort of come together. A lot of times they're not things we can see with our naked eyes. They're just in our environment. And this can cause a little bit or a lot of inflammation, depending on what the trigger is.
Right. So let's say you were taking a two-pronged approach. Your numbers aren't great. You really are dealing with a lot of symptoms. Your free T3 and T4 aren't in line. You end up deciding to use thyroid medication, but you also know that you have Hashimoto's because you've been positively, your blood tests come back positive for the antibodies. What can people start to do in their life, knowing that toxins and nutrient deficiencies and our diet and lifestyle play a major role in this? What can people start to do to heal and get on the path to feeling their best?
Some of the things that I really love to start with is food as medicine and addressing some of the imbalances that are present. So most people with Hashimoto's are going to have a ton of nutritional deficiencies, and they're going to have blood sugar issues, and they're going to have food sensitivities. So these three things are things that I feel like most people can tackle on their own or working with a coach or just getting really educated on. So making sure that all the food that you're eating is clean source, it's organic. We're not eating a lot of inflammatory seed oils. These can definitely contribute to the overall inflammatory load in the body. Foods that are commonly reactive in Hashimoto's are going to be gluten, dairy, and soy. So oftentimes I will recommend a gluten-free diet for most people to start with. About 88% of people with Hashimoto's, even if they don't have celiac disease, do end up feeling better on a gluten-free diet. About 30% of them will be able to reduce their thyroid antibodies within just a few months. Some of them I've seen complete remissions where they just remove gluten within 90 days. I don't have any more antibodies. My thyroid function returned to normal and all of my other symptoms went away. And this does happen for some, right? And then looking at a few key targeted nutrients that may be deficient. So selenium is a really big one, around anywhere from like 83 micrograms to 200 micrograms per day, can reduce the thyroid antibodies by about half in 3 months. It can help with anxiety and hair loss. A lot of times the ladies that start on that are like, okay, I was anxious, I was losing my hair, and it's like, okay, we had raging antibodies, and the selenium can start bringing that down. Myo-inositol is another really, really helpful supplement. The studies are now showing that 600 milligrams of myo-inositol combined with 83 micrograms of selenium can help get Hashimoto's into remission. So just these two things, when you take them over a time period, it can normalize your TSH. Some people may not even need thyroid medications if they're diagnosed in the early stages. And then the thyroid antibodies can get into the remission range. So I love recommending that. And it's myo-inositol is like sweet tasting, and it's like a kind of a nutrient that has a very sweet taste, and it's very, very helpful for not just thyroid antibodies, but also the TSH and for blood sugar balance. Even symptoms like OCD, which is an unknown symptom of early stages of Hashimoto's, can get better with myo-inositol.
Can you talk? I mean, first of all, anyone who has Hashimoto's or is like thinking they might be diagnosed with it, that right there with I think was like the golden nugget of today's podcast, because so many times you know, they're just like ads on Instagram or someone saying what's worked for them. And this combination, knowing that it's so powerful, um, it's it's just nutrients that our body needs to properly function is just amazing. So thank you for sharing that. Can you talk about the difference between myo-inositol and D-chiro-inositol?
Sure. And I actually think sometimes using them together may be very helpful. So there is a combination that was studied of D-chiro-inositol and myo-inositol for PCOS. And it's incredibly helpful to normalize hormone levels. And specifically, myo-inositol has been studied in Hashimoto's.
Mhm.
About 600 milligrams per day is the dose that's being utilized. And some women do find that adding a little bit of D-chiro-inositol may actually be helpful as well.
Okay, great. Um, Other than those nutrients and allergens to remove, like gluten, dairy, and soy, can you talk about how blood sugar impacts our thyroid hormones?
Yes, blood sugar.
I'm
It's a
like,
big one,
yes,
right?
let's get to the good stuff.
Such a big one. So blood sugar imbalances, whenever we have, I like to say like blood sugar imbalances, whenever we eat high carb foods are like throwing fuel on the fire in the autoimmune attack. People will notice that they're more anxious and they could test their antibodies when they're eating high sugar, high glucose, or high carbohydrate containing foods, and that will put them on a blood sugar roller coaster. So this is one of the key things that I recommend is let's balance your blood sugar and get off of gluten when you have Hashimoto's. And people will say like, well, people used to think that I had like bipolar disorder, right? Or I used to be so moody and irritable and hangry. And all we will do is just say, like, eat a bit more protein, a bit more fat, and lower your carbohydrate intake. And people just are like, I feel so much more calm. And you can actually test their thyroid antibodies and see that the thyroid antibodies reduce as well. Myo-inositol is helpful for blood sugar imbalances, and that's part of one of the mechanisms of how it works for Hashimoto's. But something like 50% of people with Hashimoto's have impaired carbohydrate tolerance, where they may not know that they have blood sugar issues, but if you do like a CGM, you'll see that you're becoming hypoglycemic or that you're having high blood sugar after eating certain foods. So this is a really, really key component of getting well with Hashimoto's.
Thank you so much for pointing out the fact that it does take high quality proteins and fats to support that. It's not just about lowering our carbohydrate intake. I think that there's a misunderstanding there where people will just bring their carbohydrate load down, but they're not replacing those nutrients with a macronutrient or nutrient status that really supports their energy levels between meals. And so it's they're really throwing themselves into low carb purgatory, not going from maybe hypoglycemic swings to low carb purgatory. And it doesn't help the anxiety levels if we're not optimally feeding ourselves. And with a number of clients that I work with, sometimes 8 times out of 10, I'm like, suboptimal protein intake. You're actually not eating enough. You've been, hypercaloric and super stressed for years. Like, how do we get you to a place where you're fueling yourself like an athlete, like a professional, whether you're, an actor or a VP or running your business or you're a really busy mom? Like, all of these roles take a lot out of you emotionally, and we need to fuel accordingly. So key for balancing blood sugar is that protein intake.
Yeah, it's amazing because a lot of women just don't realize they think they're eating enough protein, but when you look at your requirements, and I would say the minimum for most people, unless they have like kidney disease, is going to be like 1 gram per kilogram. And then you might need more if you have a chronic inflammatory condition because you need the protein to help build your body back up, right? When we are in an inflammatory state, that's actually a catabolic process where our body's breaking itself down. So we actually need a bit more protein. And I would even say to the athlete level, like some of the athletes that are getting 1 gram per pound of body weight, somewhere right in between that 1 gram per kilogram or pound range is where I would recommend for most women with Hashimoto's. They should be somewhere within that range, right?
Preach.
And yes.
I mean, there's so much misinformation out there about inflammation and tying protein intake to inflammation, but it is like exactly what you said. It's a catabolic process. Your body is inflamed. It's breaking itself down. It doesn't have the nutrients it needs to rebuild, to create those hormones, those neurotransmitters, and to really have the healing that it needs. Critical. Well, now we have to tie it back to the adrenals, because that's the next place you went after thyroid with your new book, Adrenal Transformation Protocol. Can you explain, obviously you're a gland lady, you're into the glands, thyroid glands, adrenal glands. How are they related, and what are our adrenals? People talk about adrenals all the time, and I think most people, if they aren't super interested in health, they're like, oh yeah, that makes cortisol and I'm stressed. But can we talk about what they do, why they're important, what their role is every day?
Sure. And people are saying like, wait, you're not doing thyroid anymore. Why are you talking about adrenals? But really the two are so intimately connected. So I would say most of the women that I've worked with Hashimoto's, with thyroid issues, more than 90% of them have some sort of adrenal issue, some sort of adrenal dysfunction. And, our hormones and our organs don't just live like separately from one another in a vacuum, right? They do communicate with one another. And our adrenal glands are these tiny little glands that sit on top of our kidneys and produce our main stress hormones, including cortisol. And there's an intricate feedback loop between thyroid hormone and cortisol. So when we have too much cortisol on board, we might have increased levels of reverse T3, which is a thyroid hormone that is essentially a blocker. So instead of getting to the thyroid receptors and turning them on, it just kind of sits there and just like takes up space and doesn't allow the active thyroid hormone to turn on the receptors. And so whenever we have elevations in cortisol, we're going to have this elevation in reverse T3. And so we're going to be hypothyroid based on our symptoms, even though our thyroid gland may be able to produce normal levels of thyroid hormone, optimal levels of thyroid hormone. So this happens whether you have Hashimoto's or you don't have Hashimoto's. And I've had a lot of ladies who have worked with me and they're like, they do not have Hashimoto's, but they have every thyroid symptom. And it's because of their adrenal dysfunction and because of the reverse T3 being so tightly bound and elevated, and all of that kind of happening within the body. And then another part of that is when we have low levels of thyroid hormone, our cortisol clearance will actually decrease to sort of help us out, because cortisol does help us with energy production and lowering our inflammation in the body. People think it's like all bad, but like you just need to have the right amounts at the right time, because it's actually very, very helpful and critical for survival to actually have cortisol. And so when we don't have enough thyroid hormone on board, cortisol kind of kicks in and it stays in the body a bit longer. And so some women will say like, I get on thyroid meds and all of a sudden I have more fatigue with it after a few weeks. What the heck is happening, right? I was overweight and I was feeling a little bit sluggish. I was losing my hair and I got this diagnosis. I got on the meds and some of the things got better, but some things got worse. And what happens is when we actually get on the thyroid hormone and you kind of normalize this thyroid function, you can unmask a cortisol deficiency, because then the cortisol clearance increases back to normal, or it can be even higher than normal depending on your thyroid hormone dosage. So they're intricately tied back together, and you can't really talk about thyroid without talking about the adrenals. And I talk about adrenals in every single one of my thyroid books. And I've also come across like a brand new protocol that worked really well for me and over 3,000 women, where I'm like, okay, I really need to get this out into the world. Like I need a quick update on just like what to do about adrenals.
Well, I'm excited to jump into the details of that and to get people links to the book. But I'd love for you to go just a little bit deeper in why someone who jumping on thyroid medication would feel so sluggish. Is it that they're relying and they've relied so heavily on their cortisol hormone that was kind of recirculating and not clearing, and they're in that they enjoy or in that fight or flight state? Um, and how is that energy different?
That's such a good question. And yes, absolutely. When we are hypothyroid, our cortisol clearance is going to be slower. So that cortisol kind of sticks around to help us out. And I would say cortisol is kind of like an anxious energy, right? So you're sort of like wired, but tired and anxious. And somebody might come into your office behind you and say hello, and you will like jump out of your seat and fall out. Or maybe that was just me, but no, it's a very like anxious energy, and you might be irritable.
Like
And
too
you
much
might
caffeine.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Like you had
Okay.
caffeine pills before an exam in college and now like you can't sleep. So that's that kind of energy that is when we actually get into like what real energy feels like, you kind of look back and you're like, I didn't realize that's not how I'm supposed to feel.
Yeah. So what does real energy look like? What is a balanced thyroid and, sort of like optimal cortisol clearance look like in the body?
So you wake up in the morning between 7 to 9, some people a little bit earlier than that, and you wake up refreshed and you wake up happy and you wake up like you're ready to take on your day. You kind of like, you get up and you're like, it's going to be a great day. Right. And then you're not the person that's crawling to your coffee machine on the ground and like ready to
Yeah.
be hooked up. You might actually just feel pretty good. You're likely going to be hungry and you're going to feel excited about your day, looking forward to your day. And then as time goes on, you're going to gradually sort of you're not going to have mood swings. You're going to have a good mood and good energy throughout the day. You're going to have good amounts of ideas, good word finding, and just like feel like vibrant and like you're meant to feel throughout your day. And then in the evenings, you're going to start getting tired. Maybe that you're going to see the sunset. You're going to be like, I'm kind of getting tired now, and it's time to wind down. And by like 9, 10 o'clock, most people should feel tired enough to fall asleep within 15 minutes and then have a really restful sleep. And kind of doing it again the next day. And you've got good libido, you don't have pain in your body, you feel calm, you kind of feel centered, you don't feel anxious, and overall your brain is working well. That's what a healthy thyroid and adrenal function will look like.
Let's unpack the morning hunger because I think a lot of people have really glommed onto or are loving intermittent fasting and waiting till 1 or 2 o'clock to eat in the afternoon, and then training their body into that type of eating schedule around the circadian rhythm. Can you talk about how that impacts our adrenals and thyroid and why it's important to be hungry in the morning and how to kind of get back to that hunger?
Sure. And I feel like there's so many wonderful protocols out there, and it's depending on where you are in your life that they might be appropriate for you. What I see are issues for people when they do intermittent fasting and all of these wonderful trends, and they're not quite ready for it. Maybe their adrenals are in a dysfunctional state, and they're going to feel worse with it, right? Especially in the long term. So they're like, I'm doing all this fasting and I'm only having coffee for breakfast. Why am I overweight? Why do I feel so tired? And
Mhm.
so part of what we think about when we don't have that morning hunger, it could be just too much cortisol in the morning. And so we want to get the cortisol levels just right. And part of that is maybe not delaying your breakfast, but delaying your coffee in the morning. Coffee is something that will artificially raise our cortisol levels. And if we become dependent on that, then our own body will essentially say, like, well, I don't need to make cortisol in the morning. There's going to be this big dose of coffee coming up. So like, I don't need to make this happen. So part of part of how we rewire that is we start off with making sure that we have exposure to bright lights in the morning. Generally, if you can go outside and get some sunshine into your eyes, that can be incredibly helpful. That tells our body to raise cortisol levels naturally, but not too high. And then we also focus on, I work with a lot of the ladies where we'll do something first thing in the morning. Maybe you're not like super hungry, but we're just trying to teach your body that it's wakey time, right? And it's time to, be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And so I'll do something like an adrenal kickstart drink where we'll combine half a cup of orange juice. Typically, people that have low cortisol levels in the morning may also have low glucose and low blood pressure. So we're utilizing the orange juice to help out with that. We're doing some electrolytes to help balance the blood pressure to support the body that way. That will give us a bit more energy too. And then we also combine that with a bit of protein and fats. So maybe half a serving of protein to one serving of protein, and maybe like a quarter cup of something like a coconut milk or coconut cream. And that sets the body up to receive that glucose to help from the orange juice to balance our blood sugar if we happen to be hypoglycemic. And then it also helps to set us up for blood sugar balance throughout the day. So I'll do that initially with people to kind of reset their cortisol patterns to make sure that we're producing enough cortisol naturally in the morning and that we're not producing too much cortisol at night when we're supposed to be resting, producing melatonin.
So if someone has a real dysregulation in their adrenals, are you taking them off caffeine completely, or are you allowing them to have it later in the day?
So I developed this protocol, and I used to tell people, like, you have to quit caffeine for 30 days. You have to sleep for 10 to 12 hours. Sometimes I would recommend hormones like pregnenolone and DHEA. And then I became a mom, and like my world shifted, as I'm sure you know
Yeah,
too. um,
intimately.
yes, absolutely. And it was like 8 months postpartum when my beautiful boy was like sweet and wonderful and beautiful, and also waking up every 2 to 3 hours to nurse, right? And so I was like, okay, I can't quit caffeine. Like I had actually just started drinking coffee for the first time in like on a regular basis. And I also was like, I can't sleep 12 hours a night. Like that's just not going to happen. I wasn't going to take hormones because I was nursing. So I was
Yeah.
like, I have to think of alternative ways to support energy production in my body. So I used to tell people they needed to get off of the caffeine. What I found is for a lot of people, like a lot of times they're self-medicating with caffeine in the morning and they're self-medicating with alcohol or wine in the evenings to help them fall asleep, right? Because they're trying to essentially get onto the right circadian rhythm through these, doses of uppers and downers. And so
Mhm.
now what I do is I help people produce energy within their bodies initially, a lot of times through mitochondrial function to balancing their circadian rhythm and utilizing targeted nutrition throughout the day to do that before we say anything about quitting caffeine, right? Because I know I've had a lot of people that are like, I want to do your program, but heck no on the caffeine, right? Like I am
Yeah.
not giving up my coffee. You're not gonna take that out of my cold dead hands, right?
Yeah, totally. So let's talk about your protocol, because I think, what's always so refreshing and something that I learned when I became a mom was really having to tailor my plans and protocols and support of my clients depending on their life stage. And it is a lot when you have to take care of multiple other small humans, maybe one large human, depending on your family and yourself. So let's talk a little bit about your new book, Adrenal Transformation, and the protocol that you produce to really support people along this journey, and with each recommendation, what the goal is on an internal biological level.
Sure. So one of the things that I figured out is like whenever we get into this survival mode and adrenal dysfunction, where our body's in a catabolic state, essentially the body is getting the message that we're not safe. And it's getting the message that we need to produce more stress hormones and fuel this stress response. The body's hearing, you're being chased by a bear. This is not the time to like reproduce. This is not the time to sleep. This is not the time to feel like calm and relaxed and have all these wonderful things like growing gorgeous hair, right? And so one of the things I figured out is like, okay, if you have all of these danger signals, are there ones that you can just kind of turn off? Like, for example, you know, you're going to have sleep deprivation when you have small children like that. That's kind of part of the game, unless you have this child that like miraculously sleeps like their first night home, right?
Yeah.
But you might do things like turning off the news if that's stressful to you, or turning off like scary things. I know some people are very, very sensitive to even like the music that they listen to. So they can't hear like sad songs because it'll make them sad, or people that are very sensitive to TV shows that have violence, or people that are sensitive to just hearing the bad news on the news. So
Mhm.
just tuning that out is going to be one way of tuning down all of the danger signals that you're getting from the environment, and then looking at what safety signals you can send to yourself, right? Big safety signal from a nutritional standpoint is making sure that you're eating nutrient dense foods, and you're eating frequently enough and having enough macronutrients and being blood sugar balanced. When we think about, if you are not eating enough calories, if you don't have enough nutrients on board, if you are skipping your meals, if you are eating foods that are inflammatory to you, like your cave woman genes are saying, like, we're in a famine. Why are we eating foods that are inflammatory? We must be in a famine, you know, for us to be skipping meals, right? Because cave women weren't like trying to intermittently fast because it was trendy.
Yeah.
so so a lot of times when we have these danger signals, we end up slowing down our metabolism and slowing down our adrenal function, right? Slowing down our thyroid function. So big safety signal is nutrition, like nourish your body. That's going to help shift you into more of a thriving mode when you're nourishing yourself enough.
Can you walk me through what like day in the life of someone on your protocol would look like? What does it look like to get enough calories, support blood sugar balance, and increase nutrient density?
Sure. So a lot of it starts with when we wake up in the morning. Ideally, you would maybe get some morning sunshine to help wake yourself up and produce cortisol naturally. Then we do that adrenal kickstart drink that combines protein, fat, a little bit of orange juice, and some sea salt and electrolytes. We'll utilize targeted supplements throughout the day, like I love to use the ABCs of adrenal support that help us become more resilient. So we'll do some of these things in the morning to help produce more energy, as well as mitochondrial support. And then we'll focus on making sure that we're eating frequently enough not to get hangry. So for many women, and of course it's a little bit different for everybody, but initially I'll give them a template. And for many women, that might actually be every 2 to 3 hours at first, while they're trying to stabilize their blood sugar and they're trying to increase their caloric intake to levels that are high enough to support their bodies. So we do limit processed foods. So I'm like, get off of gluten, dairy, and soy if you can. Grains, if you have blood sugar issues, these can be problematic for a lot of people as well. So we do exclude them for the 4 week protocol. And we really focus on eating like, you know, grass-fed meats and organic vegetables, a lot of nutrient dense foods. If you can do liver, that would be fabulous to do some liver. That has a great amount of various nutrients such as iron that can help fuel your energy levels. And we do that throughout the day. We do focus on trying to eat mostly when it's light outside. Some people may need initially to like plan for doing snacks even after it's dark in the initial stages. And I'll even say, like, if you're somebody that wakes up at 3 a.m., have a banana by your bedside. But ideally, we're going to be working to making that eating window throughout the daylight. And we're also going to be kind of squeezing your caffeine intake. So we're going to delay it a little bit in the morning at first, and then we're going to try to pull it back from the evenings. I know I've had clients that would drink espresso every 2 hours until like 10 o'clock at night. And so we're trying to move the caffeine earlier than like 3 p.m. And then in the evenings, we're focusing on winding down routines. So I love recommending an Epsom salt bath, and the heated water and the magnesium in the Epsom salts really helps to support our so many processes in the body and helps us to become more calm. It relieves pains, menstrual cramps, that can relieve anxiety. And it also sets us up for a great night's sleep. So I will look at like Aura Ring data, and I'll find that if you do an Epsom salt bath, you'll have more restorative sleep compared to if you don't. And you'll get a more restful sleep. You're more likely to sleep all night long if you do something like that. And definitely getting out of the hot bath too sends a cue to your body that it's time to rest.
Such a great hack, since our body temperature drops when we're falling asleep, to artificially heat yourself up and allow for an even steeper drop. Most of the time I don't like those spikes and crashes, but with heat at night, it's particularly helpful. And even like with my kids, I've noticed, sometimes we're running late for something. We get back from baseball late and they're like, bedtime. We just skipped the bath. And I'm always like, I don't even care. Like, make him stand in the shower for like 2 minutes. Like, I want that hot water on his body. It does a number on all of us to really calm our bodies and get us in that state prior to sleep that is just so restful. When it comes, speaking of baseball, when it comes to working out, movement, how often are you seeing someone's workout schedule or work schedule really impacting their adrenals? And what are your
Oh,
recommendations?
oh my goodness, right? So I know I had one woman that reviewed one of my books and she said, I didn't need to do any of this to feel better. I just had to quit my job, right? So, and so, yes, if you have a work schedule that's not compatible with your lifestyle, I know it's not something that most people could just quit their jobs, but this can definitely be a huge impact. One of the most challenging things is working third shift. So
Night
I know
shift.
yeah, exactly. Night shift. So I have wonderful friends who are pharmacists and nurses that will work these overnight shifts. And that is so stressful on the body. That's been tied to a lot of circadian rhythm imbalances and higher levels of thyroid antibodies as well. So night shift work, I mean, that's not something that I would recommend for most people if they can help it. As far as definitely, if you have a job that is super stressful, this is a potential trigger. I talk about, foods that can be inflammatory, right? Of course, but getting rid of toxic people out of your life can be even more beneficial to your health, right? Than getting rid of some of the toxic foods. And then as far as exercise goes, this is kind of a surprising one for some people because I've had women that were like trying to lose weight and they're like, I'm barely eating any calories and I'm doing so much exercise, but I'm so tired and I can't lose weight. I'm even putting on weight. And depending on what their cortisol patterns look like, I might say, hey, if your cortisol is flatlined and your adrenals are flatlined, all the exercise that you're doing is actually sending more danger signals to your body. And it's telling your body, hey, we're in a stressful situation. Sounds like we're in a famine and a war all at once. Girl, we've got you. We're going to slow down your metabolism so that you don't ever have to eat and you're going to still survive this. And so part of what I will do is say hey, let's cut back on all this intense exercise because that's catabolic if you're not balanced, right? If you don't balance it with weightlifting and muscle building exercise, you can actually be making yourself worse depending on what state of adrenal dysfunction you're in. So I've had women that I'll say do less exercise and eat more and incorporate some really pleasurable activities into your routine. And they're like, oh, when I lost weight. So we have about 80% success rate with women who want to lose weight, that they actually do lose weight as part of the program.
You touched on a cortisol curve, and are there certain dysfunctions that you see or patterns that you see on a cortisol curve that are that are red flags for you? I think about in the hormone space, estrogen dominance. So for cortisol, what are you mentioned flatline. What are some things and patterns that you see on someone's cortisol test that indicate to you specific protocols need to be put into place?
Such a great question. So a healthy cortisol pattern would look like a cortisol rise in the morning. And so you kind of go down this lovely slide until you have low levels of cortisol in the evening and then you can fall asleep. what I typically will see, depending on the person, is some people will have elevated cortisol all day long. And so they're in like this fight or flight mode. They're very irritable. They're very much like everybody is annoying and slow. And why can't they do things faster? They have trouble sleeping. And, they're kind of like in a high stress state. And so for people like that, oftentimes they might have high blood pressure as well. So we would focus on doing things. A lot of it is the same because you're always trying to reduce your stress, right? But for people in that state, you might really benefit from doing some aerobic exercise to help clear out that cortisol, and that can actually be really helpful for you. And these are people that feel like, I feel so much better after I go for a run. It's like, okay, this is your medicine. You've got the right dose, you got the right medicine, keep up with it, right? And then I'll have people that are on a cortisol roller coaster. So they might start off either high or low in the morning, and they're kind of like this, and they'll have feelings of hangry and irritability, like maybe that 3 p.m. slump. And that is usually like a blood sugar imbalance. So what we'll do is think it's like people have lunch at noon and then they have dinner at 6, and between 12 and 6 is like this opportunity to like either like eat chips and get hangry, or it's an opportunity to eat something with protein and fat and just keep yourself stable. So for a lot of times when I see people on that roller coaster, it's let's focus on getting some more protein and fat and some snacks in between your meals so you don't get hangry and you don't like fall off the cliff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other part that I'll see is sometimes it's like a reverse curve. So they'll start off having no energy, and then they'll have that like high energy in the evening. And that looks like I'm ready to go to bed, but I'm getting a second win. I'm wired and tired. And so that point, it's like really important to focus on a nighttime routine where you're sleeping in a really dark space, you're cutting back your caffeine intake, you're to earlier in the day, and maybe you're focusing on like wearing blue light blockers and whatever you can do. Like I kind of say, like, make your sleep environment like a cave, make sure it's cold and dark, turn off any blue lights. That can be a really big game changer. We also will focus on like magnesium and Epsom salt baths, and perhaps some myo-inositol, something in the evenings to kind of like, move that down a little bit. And then part of that, and it's often I'll recommend the same thing for flatlined adrenals, as well as that that morning fatigue or that low morning cortisol, is I'll really focus on rising those levels up in the morning. So bright lights in the morning, adrenal kickstart, perhaps doing a supplement like an adrenal supplement that contains some licorice. Licorice helps to stretch out our cortisol levels throughout the day too. So you don't want to take it if you have high cortisol, high blood pressure, but if you have low cortisol and low blood pressure, trouble waking up in the morning, oftentimes that's going to be helpful. So we're really trying to like, get you used to being a human and not a vampire, so that you're tuned into making sure you have good energy during the daytime and that you're resting at nighttime.
It's so interesting because it's almost like praised when people are hustling and working and nonstop, but eventually you burn out. And that healing process can take such a long time. Can you talk about what people can expect if they first get their blood test, or they do maybe a cortisol urine analysis, or however they're getting their testing done, and they're looking at a 24-hour period, and they go, okay, obviously I don't have a healthy cortisol curve. It doesn't come up and slide down towards the evening. I'm all over the place, or I'm high all day. How long should someone expect it to take to heal, and when should they retest?
Sure. So for my functional medicine training, when I was working with hormones like pregnenolone and DHEA, and some lifestyle changes, as well as adaptogens and the nutrients, typically we would say 3 months to 2 years is when you'll actually see a full healing, right? With that, I started to notice that if you can get really heavy on the lifestyle, you can do that within 30 days. So if you could sleep for 12 hours a night, for 30 days straight, like you can heal yourself within 30 days, right? And I wish everybody could do that. Like I wish, everybody could do that, but it's not going to happen for everybody. So somewhere in between that, what I found with this protocol is within 3 to 4 weeks is when we see people getting significantly better. And I actually don't necessarily have people test before or after. One of the reasons I developed this protocol and created this book is because I had so many people from my community that were like, I can't get access to these tests. And I'd be like, okay, great. You can self-order them. Like I'm always just trying to, help people help themselves. But they were like, but I don't know how to interpret them. So then it was like finding a doctor that could interpret them and finding the doctor that knew some of the protocols. So, but generally for people to feel better, it's going to be 3 to 4 weeks where we have had people like 92% of them will say like within 3 weeks, their brain fog is significantly improved and their energy levels are improved, their libido, all of this within like 3 to 4 weeks. And I was like, okay, with the hormones that I was utilizing, it was like 3 to 4 months before we saw the same results that we're now getting in 3 to 4 weeks.
Which is great. Well, I'm so excited for your book to come out and for people to get their hands on this protocol because it's obviously impacted thousands of women. And it, in today's day and age, with everything that's going on in the last couple of years, it's really needed. And I love that your lifestyle recommendations really push back against maybe intermittent fasting, over caffeinating, hustle culture. It's just all, it's self-care and it doesn't happen overnight, but if you can really dedicate your time and energy to it, you can really get relief in those 3 to 4 weeks. So where can people follow along? Where can they find more? Where can they snag your book?
Sure. It's thyroidpharmacist.com is my website. And if they go to thyroidpharmacist.com/ABC, I have the ABCs of Adrenal Guide that talks about utilizing adaptogens, B vitamins, vitamin C, as well as magnesium, which are some of the things that are really helpful when we're under a lot of stress. And they can find me on Instagram under Isabella Wentz PharmD. And my books are available at Amazon and Barnes and Noble, wherever fine books are sold.
So one last question for the moms out there with young kids who have been through all the things that feel like adrenal fatigue and you kind of wait and ask yourself like, do I have low thyroid? What's happening? What advice do you have for them for what's one piece of advice you have for young moms to get through that period of time and to ensure that they aren't making matters worse?
Sure. So I have a tired mommy protocol. So what's happening in our bodies when we're sleep deprived? There are a lot of nutrients that can become depleted. Part of that is going to be B vitamins. You want to replenish those. Thiamine is particularly helpful for waking up your brain and giving you energy if you've been sleep deprived. P5P is a really, really good one as well, but you don't want to go above 50 milligrams because then it can suppress milk production. You can utilize some adaptogens, not all of them, but something like holy basil can be helpful. You could drink it as like Tulsi tea. And this can work really, really well for balancing mood, balancing cortisol levels. It may also have some galactagogue properties. So be sure to check in with your lactation consultant if you have, if you're making too much milk, that might not be the thing for you, right?
Yeah.
Vitamin C can be incredibly helpful. Taking magnesium, if you can do an Epsom salt bath, if you're ever feeling like really overwhelmed and tired and frazzled, sometimes just doing that Epsom salt bath can be incredibly helpful. Definitely if you have like nursing aversion or you're just feeling like overwhelmed. People say like sleep when the baby sleeps, right? But sometimes it's like cook when the baby cooks, right? You got to do other things. And those are things that are very that are going to give you energy. So we need magnesium to produce energy in our bodies. Electrolytes are super fabulous for nursing moms. And just in general, we're putting out so much, milk and all of those healing capacities. So making sure you have those on board, that can be very helpful and supportive of breast milk production, just recovery. They studied electrolytes in like extreme athletes, and it showed that these athletes, like it helped with their recovery. I'm like, being a mom of a newborn or even a toddler, that's like an extreme sport too, right? So definitely recommend doing things like that. And then fish oil, choline, and carnitine. So we do know that omega-3 fatty acids kind of get depleted during pregnancy and nursing, as do choline and carnitine. And all of these things can actually help your, not just yourself, but also like the baby's brain development. So that's kind of my tired mommy stack, is like carnitine, um, choline and
Omega-3s.
fish oils. Yes, exactly. Thiamine, doing things like that. And of course, making sure that you're finding time to nourish yourself and support yourself, and get obviously, like, ask for help when you need it. I think some of us try to do it all ourselves, and that isn't always the best thing, right?
Definitely. Well, yeah, you make an important point on the omega-3s and choline and L-carnitine, but like just thinking about the growing baby's brain, 75% DHA, and choline is the little taxi that delivers that omega-3 to their brain. So if that tells you anything about how critical it is for their cognitive development. We really need it, especially if you're nursing and they're relying on you for those nutrients.
And they're really helpful for mama's brain too, and dealing with sleep deprivation. So if you're like walking around and feel like you're super sleep deprived and your brain's not working, like, these are things you can take that will help you and your baby. Like, I know they're like, you can't necessarily like drink 7 cups of coffee, right? Like, I know that's kind of the
Yeah,
what some women feel like they should do, right? But a lot of these things can build energy in your body naturally.
definitely. Oh, Dr. Wentz, you have such great information. Thank you so much for all you put out online and for being here on the show today. I really, really appreciate it. We'll put links to all of your website, your Instagram, your books, your new book, and your Tired Mommy Protocol in today's podcast notes. But thank you, thank you, thank you. I really appreciate all that you're doing and the information you're sharing with people to heal themselves.
Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. It's been such a pleasure and honor to be on your show.
Have a great day.